Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our conversation on building a sustainable talent strategy. A few housekeeping items before we begin. All lines are on mute and will remain on mute for the duration of the presentation. However, we have saved time at the end to answer questions. So if you have any questions as we're going along, please submit them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. The session is being recorded and we will send out the replay as well as any slides to all registrants. So without further ado, let me hand it over to Rob to get us started.
Thanks very much, Kate, and welcome everyone out there in webinar land to our webinar today. Kate did a very great job teeing us up there, and I wanted to make sure I thanked her by name because she is this nameless, faceless, omnipotent voice being cast down upon us, and people are out there thinking, is that AI? What's going on there? And I can confirm she is a real human being, or at the very least, extremely convincing AI. So in any case, let's get this e-show on the e-road here. We're going to have some fun tonight, or today, whatever time of day it is, where you're tuning in from, and work through some of this stuff. We've got a couple of amazing panelists here to help work us through this and just blow the roof off the place with their talent and career development insights. I am Rob Stevenson. I will be your moderator today. Under normal circumstances, I am hosting and producing the podcast Talk Talent to Me, where I sit down with VPs of talent, CHROs, these sorts of folks, and we shoot the breeze about recruiting. So 1,200 something pros I've talked to on that show have led me to this event here, where I will hopefully be chiming in with some accumulated wisdom from those folks as I mostly tee up our awesome panelists. And our awesome panelists are, first up, the Career Mobility Solutions Partner at LHH, Adam Alexander. Adam, welcome to the webinar. How are you today?
I'm great, Rob. Thank you.
Really pleased to have you. Before we move along here, I was hoping you might share a little bit about your background, kind of how you came to be in your current role at LHH and how you would describe that role.
Yeah, actually, and I don't want to spoil too much of what we're going to talk about today, but I actually have a pretty unique background of all the topics we're going to build on. So I started off long ago as a recruiter and helping to help make those candidates better fits for the customers I was trying to place them at. I became more of a career coach and moved into an organization where we provided career transition services. And from there, I found a real affinity to using that career expertise to help organizations support their employees and retain those employees through career development. So I've been doing career development for the last 17 years, 7 with a prior organization and 10 with LHH after that organization was acquired, and really helping organizations support the employees support the career development of their employees, as well as the career support of the managers.
So 10 years here at LHH, how has your career developed in that time?
Well, my career's moved from various places to supporting, organizations with just career development to more some of the leadership development support, and now supporting much more broad-based career mobility function, where we're helping with career development, redeployment, and career readiness within organizations. So really kind of tying a broad spectrum of support with the careers of individuals within those organizations.
Great. I wanted to call out your own journey so that folks know that you're not just whistling Dixie when you start talking about career development here, that you have actually, walked it as you talked it. So glad to have you here, Adam. Also on the webinar with us today is the SVP of Recruitment Solutions here at LHH, Jonathan Cohn. Jonathan, welcome to you. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm doing very well. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. Would love for you to take the same question. Would you mind sharing a little bit about your background, how you came to be in your role and what that role is?
Yeah, so I lead the southern half of the United States for LHH Recruitment Solutions. And like most folks in recruiting, I got into this business as a referral from a friend. And I fell in love with the opportunity to partner with clients and solve their complex challenges and problems and also fell in love with the idea of the impact that we can make from a candidate perspective. As Adam mentioned, the ability to essentially change someone's life or provide them the next opportunity is certainly rewarding. And I've been here, turned around one day, and I've been here almost 15 years. Not really sure how that happened, but here we are.
Fantastic. Here we are. Before we move along, I'm going to throw you both a quick curveball that we did not speak about before. What is your favorite interview question to ask candidates? Jonathan, I'll start with you since you're the recency bias here.
Yeah, I typically, and this goes deep, I typically like to understand somebody's motivation and what it is that motivates them on a day-to-day basis. And I think the answers that come from that offer up more questions, and you gain a lot of insight about somebody through the lens of what motivates them and keeps them going on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, definitely. I love that one. Adam, how about you?
Well, probably along the same lines, and I think great minds think alike, not necessarily motivations, but interests. I think a lot of times we focus in careers, we focus on skills. And obviously the skills, can I do the job? Am I able to effectively perform the duties that I'm being either recruited for or asking to do on a day-to-day basis? But we don't often think about, like, am I passionate about the work that I'm doing? And that really leads to, individuals being more productive and having more success. So, I think that's one of the things I like is really finding out, what really not just motivates the individual, but what are they really passionate about, what drives them?
Yeah, I love that question too. I love to get into folks' interests and assess their level of curiosity. I think curiosity is sort of like upriver of every single upstream of every single other quality. Like if you have that, then you can probably do just about any job, given the time and training. So thanks for sharing those. Let's keep this show on the road here, shall we? So we are gathered here today to join hearts and hands and discuss the notion of building a sustainable talent strategy. So what is sustainable talent? I'll not read off the deck to you, but there's a quick definition for the folks out there to check out. And then we basically summed up sustainable talent into these 4 pillars: recruitment, talent development, employee mobility, and candidate and employee nurturing. And so if you've been paying attention thus far, you will already have connected the dot that Jonathan and Adam are both responsible for each of these, really 2 of these pillars each. So that's why we wanted to bring these guys into the room to talk about what is sustainable talent. So let's spend a little bit more time defining it. Jonathan, maybe we'll start with you. If you were to go a little bit beyond the definition we had on that last slide, how would you kind of describe what a sustainable talent strategy is?
I think in its simplest form, it's a strategy that encompasses all facets of the candidate journey and is both repeatable and scalable. If I were to add to that, I would say each area of the strategy would be weighted given the current business goals or objectives. And with that, it should be adaptable as these change often. Like a well-oiled machine, if one of these is not properly functioning or represented, it will result in challenges or breakdown in the desired outcome.
Now, from a more career development perspective, Adam, would you add anything to that?
I think the key moment what Jonathan talked about is, all facets of the career journey. And when we move into, what we're talking about here is, the solutions that LHH provides. So we really talk about end-to-end support for the entire employee life cycle, what we call career moments. And so you talked a little bit about, Jonathan's background in terms of recruitment and helping individuals and organizations build their own team. And then once we get them in, how do we develop them? How do we help them figure out where their fit is within the organization? So helping them move into additional internal roles and making sure that we're providing the skills and talent that we need from that internal talent pool, and then developing those people as we move along.
Now, we use the word sustainable and we don't use the word repeatable or scalable. That is deliberate. So, Adam, I'm curious, what is it meant to sustain here? Why do you think we use that word?
Well, we want to make sure that we're, have a nice balance between the talent that we're bringing in and developing the talent that we already have. So we want to make sure we're aware of, and I go back to what I talked about before in terms of the interest. So we want to find out what people are interested in so we can align the aspirations of the individual to the needs of the organization. And so as we bring talent in to fill those gaps that we might not already have, we want to be able to develop that internal talent to fill the needs that we'll have on an ongoing basis. So it's not necessarily we're taking steps, it's we're developing talent over here, where we fill in gaps, we're bringing recruitment to fill in those pieces, and it's something that's an ongoing process.
You know, sometimes I think it's helpful when defining something to say what that thing is not. Jonathan, I was hoping you might share some examples of something that's an unsustainable talent strategy, maybe other organizations you've been at or customers you've spoken to where you can just look at it and be like, that ain't sustainable.
Yeah, I think if we look at this in terms of having a total talent strategy, right? Attract, recruit, retain, develop, and these pieces are moving at all times. I would say that a common one that we hear is we want to hire the best and we're willing to pay for it. That sounds excellent, but without any sort of development or growth plan for these individuals, retention always suffers, right? You bring in the best of the best, and then there's no thought or action or plan given to what comes after they're here. What comes after them being in the role and being a high performer for the first year? What does that mean for their career? What happens if they're not a high performer? There's not a lot of thought given into it, and that's not a sustainable strategy. I think another one that comes to mind, like from an attraction or recruiting standpoint, is if what you advertise or sell as your organization's values or culture or role to be, and it turns out to be different, again, that will lead to an unsustainable situation because candidates are not as interested nowadays in kind of putting your head down and just grinding through it. They want to know and they want to have clear expectations of what it is that they're getting into. And so oftentimes we see that as a stumbling block.
Connects to your favorite interview question, right? What their motivations and our long-term goals. Wow. It's not your first rodeo, is it, Jonathan?
No, sir.
Adam, do you want to beat up an unsustainable talent strategy before we move on here? I'm curious if you have additional thoughts.
Well, I think, when we talk about unsustainable talent strategy, I think, what we're talking about is, a lot of these things, as we show in this diagram, are segmented and it should be more of a continuum. So it's not just recruitment over here and development over here. And I look to, a lot of the work that we do with organizations when we're talking about developing people or even redeploying talent, where we're talking about maybe there's organizations getting rid of a group of people over here where they have needs over here, and they haven't taken the opportunity to develop those people or find a fit where they might be able to fit throughout the organization. And I, because we do that work, a lot of times we, cite some of the work in this area. And I think some important things to look at is recent global research by McKinsey said that 87% of organizations said they're expecting skill gaps in the coming years, and 43% say they already have. And, that I think that's really a key of, what an unsustainable strategy would be, that 43% say you're already having a skills gap within your organization because you're not taking the time to develop, upskill, and reskill talent that you already have, or finding the talent you need to fill in those organizations. So I think that's the biggest challenge. So it's not necessarily a specific example, but we're talking generally when consulting with organizations that we're thinking of these elements segmented, that tends to bring some of the challenges that we're talking about.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I really like the slide that we're on right now because we've sort of just mapped out what the career journey looks like for any given individual. And nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more. Each one does happen to, connect to an LHH recruitment or development product. You will see at the bottom there. But we have identified in purple, these are sort of the pillars of the sustainable talent strategy. And I wanted to call this out because the people out there listening, you may be in recruitment or career development. You may be responsible for all of it, right? You may be the recruiter and the HR person in one. This may be one team. This may be several different teams. So I wanted to look at the whole life cycle here and then ask you both, what is sort of the ideal relationship between recruiting teams and career development teams, who maybe all of these tiles here aren't necessarily the responsibility of the recruiter or the responsibility of the career development side, but each one does affect that person's ability to do their job well. So Jonathan, maybe we could start with you. How do you sort of envision an ideal relationship between multiple sorts of talent teams in this, given this sort of mapping?
Yeah, and I think Adam had a great example of it being a continuum. If you think of these groups working hand in hand with each other to make sure that they have the same mission, the same strategy, and that they're complementing each other in a way that provides support. I know when we're consulting with companies, what we find is a challenge typically in larger organizations is that these functions are very verticalized or siloed, and one, two ships in the night type concept, which leads to a disconnect and a breakdown in the process. At smaller organizations or mid-sized organizations, you often find that this is handled by one person or a group, just one team. And in that instance, bandwidth and resources can become a challenge. But when these things are in the continuum and worked collectively in a collaborative effort to make sure that everyone's achieving the desired outcome, this is when we see real success.
Got it. Adam, over to you. I'm curious if you have thoughts on that too.
I do, and it really ties to a lot of the work that I do with organizations is that interconnectivity. Now, we might not necessarily working with Jonathan and our team with recruiting, but especially with the internal recruiting team, where we're supporting individuals in their careers, especially if we have an opportunity where maybe we have a merger and acquisitions per se, and we have two organizations coming together. And we have a lot of talent and skills that might be redundant, and we're looking to say, how can we fill in gaps where recruiters are looking to fill needs in other parts of the organization? How can we assess and develop that skills so that the individuals that potentially could lose their job or might be in those redundant positions might be able to easily move into those roles through relatively easy reskilling or upskilling. So the career development aspects, so we talk about developing skills is always a skill development aspect, but career development really ties it to the individual. So how can we tie that aspirations, the interests, the motivations we talked about earlier for the individual to the broader needs of the organization? So that's what, I really see career development being is, what does the individual want to do? And how can we fit that within what the organization wants to do? And that connection to recruiting really ties it to the immediate needs of what the organization has today. These are the jobs we're looking to fill. So the recruiters can say, here are areas where we might be lacking skills in the marketplace. Can we develop that talent that we have internally to fill those gaps to overcome some of those challenges we have in the recruiting space? Or, maybe there are specific skills that we can't develop in the time that we need it, that we'll need to go and specifically target opportunities through our recruitment services. So, that's where I see that really yin and yang with recruitment and, that career development or talent development, whatever the organizations call it, is, being able to see the talent that we have today, the skills that we have, the skills that we could develop, and then the skills that we would need to bring in from outside the organization.
I think you maybe just answered this, Adam, but I'm curious, when you go out there and speak to customers, where are the areas they tend to struggle with the most? What are like the common challenges and places people tend to struggle?
Well, I mean, specifically with what I do when I talk to organizations, again, talking career development is, I would say a lot of organizations focus when they talk about career development is they're saying, hey, let's just focus on skills, the technical skills to be able to do the job. But they don't really make necessarily the connection to the individual. So when we talk about career development is, helping the individual understand, maybe build their own personal brand in terms of, back to it again and keep focusing on it, is their interest, their motivation, their current skills. How do they build that brand so that people are more aware of what they're doing? So those career skills aren't necessarily what organizations are focusing on. They're focusing on more the technical skills, which are important. But I think helping the individual figure out where they want to go and what they need to develop is even more impactful, because you'd be able to find that really enlightenment for them in terms of, hey, this is what I want to do, this is what I'm good at, this is what I'm passionate about, and I'll develop the skills to become a better fit for that, rather than just saying, take this course, learn this skill. That's where a lot of development focus. And then the flip side is, really bringing in that manager's role. So we talk a lot about, helping the managers, really the conduit between the employee and those organizational needs, and not, often focus on career development. They say, well, we're focusing on the individuals. We're going to give them the ability to think about their careers and don't often focus on the manager. So I know a lot of things we're talking about here in terms of leadership development, helping develop those managers to become better at having those development discussions with their direct boards and getting that alignment between their passions, interests, and the needs of the organization itself.
Well, and Rob, if I could add, Adam, you make such a good point, and it's something that we consistently do to the first part of your response about attitudes, motivation, soft skills, right? The technical skills have to be there, but from a recruitment perspective, being able, and we typically ask a client this question, are you looking for somebody to sit in this role for the next 20 years, or are you looking for somebody that wants to grow, climb the corporate ladder? On paper, those look exactly the same. But the outcome of hiring one versus the other, based on your intended outcome, has a wholly different scenario to it, right? And you end up in a spot. So being able to stress soft skills, these attitudes, motivations are such a critical part of the recruiting process. And as Adam mentioned, even in the development process, and as you can see, it seems to be a critical component throughout the entire chain here.
Do you think recruiting teams should be recruiting based on that question, whether this is someone who can sit in this role for a long, long time, or are they going to want to move up the chain? Because I feel like there is, in my experience, it's always been the latter. There's always been this expectation of like, we're going to, if not force feed, like actively push you towards these development things and towards management in these cases. So is this common for people to have to ask themselves that when they go out to find an individual?
I think it's a very important question for both sides. It's a very important question to understand, to Adam's point earlier about interests or passion, or how do you see yourself? Like, where do you want to be? What is the role that you envision for yourself? And you find individuals that say, look, I want a steady opportunity. I want to be able to go in every day. I want to do my job to the best of my ability, and I want to clock out and I want to go home. And that's okay. There are organizations that are looking for that. Conversely, there are employees that are very interested in climbing the corporate ladder, and companies that are very interested in acquiring that talent. And so I think it's a very important question to ask on both sides. There's no right or wrong answer. It's really about aligning interests and motivations, if you will, from a candidate and a client perspective.
And Rob, Jonathan brings up a great point when he was talking about, determining the interest of the individual in terms of where they would want to go and what they see their career as. And that's why, I talk about personalizing this experience for this individual. Is a lot of the challenges that organizations face is defining what career development even means. So a lot of people assume that career development is promotion. I start here one day, eventually I'll be the CEO. But the motivations of the individual are really like, maybe I like staying in this job. Maybe I want to stay in this job for the next 10, 15 years. Maybe that's a passion. Or, maybe I want to learn different skills and move laterally within the organization because there's more growth over there. Or I see that there's a need for those skills and our organization will need those skills more. And, I, as an individual, am able to personalize that experience for myself through career development and then move on, for, the broader organizational needs for talent.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I wanted to call that out because if you were to look at this progression here on the slide and say, well, hold on, I don't want to develop my leadership. Thank you very much. Right. I'm comfortable being an individual contributor. So this setup is worthwhile from the entire organization's perspective, as in there will be employees who wish to develop in certain ways, not all of them, right? So as you both called out, it's about finding those motivations. Let's keep
Rob,
keep
can I
moving,
add
shall we?
something there? I think something
I'd love it
that's
if you added
important
something.
is
Yeah.
they might not be interested today. They could be in a season of life where that development opportunity isn't something that they're interested in, but as an organization, you need to have a plan for that because at some point that can change. And conversely, you will also have individuals that want development, seek development quickly. So either way, you still need to have a plan.
Yeah, that makes sense. People's motivations change as their priorities change, of course, as their lives change. Sure, it makes sense. Look, at some point we have got to start the show here, you guys. Let's keep moving here. So we wanted to pull out some data and some general market trends, because if you're on this webinar, you're thinking, why now? Why now, Rob? Why now are we doing a sustainable talent webinar strategy? Well, I'll tell you. It's because LHH has pulled out a ton of data, and there's a lot of other content in support of this. There's a webinar, or sorry, we're on the webinar. There's an ebook that we'll link you to at the end of this, where a ton of data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and other places is collated to explain the kind of the economic moment that we are in. And so some of this data, some of this data is sort of suggesting this strange paradox where we're seeing is like high unemployment rates, but then less growth in overall pay and less likelihood for people to want to move to a new role, which is strange to me. If like unemployment was low, if people are having jobs, you'd think that there would be less fear about moving to a new company. So I was kind of hoping we could jump into the current economic moment a little bit here. Jonathan, do you see this sort of paradox, and like why do you think it is that despite despite unemployment rates being low, there's still less willingness to move around?
Yeah, it's a very interesting time and market that we're in, and there seems to be a rebalancing taking place. If you think of this in terms of a pendulum that swings and it's constantly ebbing back and forth, the post-COVID years of 21 and 22 caused a significant swing one way: record wage growth, countless advancement and promotional opportunities, fully remote work. These were a significant change from, let's say, homeostasis, and not good or bad, but a change. And as we're seeing that pendulum start to swing back the other way, partly driven by economics and partly by sentiment and expectations, I think there's a few points that I'll add here that are contributing to this. We've been in a higher interest rate environment, which has increased the cost of capital, and CapEx budgets have been reducing. Inflation, everybody's heard about that. While coming down, it's still been a factor, and it has an influence on hiring, retention, wage growth, et cetera. And an important point to mention is the millennial and Gen Z population, which represents a significant part of the working labor group, have never worked, or frankly, most of them haven't been alive during a high inflationary environment. And so you couple that with polarizing elections, rising geopolitical concerns, all of this starts to bleed into sentiment and expectations. And so from a candidate perspective, many potential candidates are uncertain about the economic outlook. And a byproduct of this is that fear that you mentioned, right? If I leave now, am I going to be the last in, first out if things continue to deteriorate, or if things deteriorate further? Also, their expectations, the willingness to move to a new role comes with higher expectations as a byproduct of what we saw in 21 and 22. Higher expectations around comp, growth opportunities, work from home policies. And then on the client side, expectations have also increased. So if hires made in 2022 only required an individual to check 6 out of 10 boxes and they got a 35% comp increase, now the desire is for candidates to check 10 out of 10 boxes and for 5 to 10% comp increase. So you can see how these contrasting views on flexibility, work from home, comp, company culture, and what's expected from an employee and an employer create this misalignment. And then to add a cherry on top, there's also a skills shortage, which is making things even more complex. And this shortage is only going to accelerate with automation and AI and further decrease in applicable candidate pool. So I think there's a lot there that I just hit you with. But so what's the answer, Jonathan? How do we navigate this? I will say that what we see from a recruiting standpoint is that clients that have a sustainable total talent strategy that's aligned with their business goals, accurately reflective of their culture, career paths, development, et cetera. And then this is the most important part, is clearly communicated to both current and future employees. Those are the ones that are seeing success.
Now, yeah, Adam, I wanted to ask you a follow-up quickly, because you think a lot about the skill gap and you think a lot about development. Is it reasonable for companies to expect someone to hit 10 out of 10 of the skills that they are hiring for, that there is no room for them to grow into a role?
Absolutely not. I mean, I think the expectation is that, they don't need to hit 10 out of 10. They can hit 7 out of 10, 10, 8 out of 10 if they want to, or maybe even less, depending on the requirements of the position. But I think the ability to develop individuals, especially individuals that are still within your organization, because they know the culture, they're familiar with it, they fit in with the culture. And I think it's important to be able to retain them. To build off what Jonathan said, we're working with organizations' careers. What I think it's amazing is about 3/4 of individuals right now say that they're not leaving the organization, mainly because of that fear or anxiety that Jonathan talked about. So organizations, some organizations might be thinking, well, why do I need to focus on career development? People aren't leaving. But what we found, and again, tying back to career development and recruiting, is, if organizations are known for investing in developing their people, they're more likely to tap into what we call, a passive talent pool. So people that aren't looking, they're very comfortable in their roles. They're anxious about leaving because, I don't know what's out there or what things might change if I do leave, and I'm comfortable with them at. But being able to see that, hey, this organization invests in the people, they're developing their people, they're making sure that those individuals have great opportunities and are able to, find that they're fit. They're more likely to tap into that pool and recruit people, even though it is a more difficult situation, that Jonathan was talking about earlier. So I think, being able to tie these two together, saying like, hey, even though these people don't want to leave, they want to stay, we want to be able to show that once you come to us, we're going to develop and retain to you. And I think, a common misconception is just because people just aren't deciding to leave today, things change and they can leave tomorrow.
Exactly.
One of our reports that we did recently said that almost 86% of people are confident that they'd be able to find a job in 6 months, up from 61% back in 2022. And what that means is, they're not leaving because of that anxiety, but once that changes and the anxiety goes away, they might leave. So you want to be able to show that, hey, we want to keep you here, we want to retain you, we will be able to find that fit for you rather than trying to find that fit somewhere else.
The good news is retention numbers have never been higher. The bad news is it's because of inflation and geopolitical chaos.
Yep.
So does that just mean that it's sort of a good time to be in career development because people are going to stick around and want to upskill, and a bad time to be in recruitment? Is it just a challenging happenstance that we're in? Is that how you read it?
Oh, go ahead, Adam. You
I
first.
was going to say it depends. Again, it depends on how organizations see this. So we're talking about, a sustainable talent strategy. The organizations that have that, yes, it would be a good time to be in career development because they see the value. Some organizations say, well, because we're not losing people, maybe we don't need to spend as much or invest as much in the development of individuals. Yes, it probably doesn't have much of an impact on recruiting, that they might have challenges regardless. But I think, organizations that do have that more comprehensive talent strategy, are more likely to have success in recruiting as well.
I would add, I think it's a great time to be in recruiting because of this paradox. There are still a significant amount of open jobs out there, and clients that are willing to partner and be flexible in their understanding and say, hey, yes, the ideal scenario would be 10 out of 10, but I'm willing to take 7 out of 10 because I have a very robust development program and I can get these individuals in and get them coached up and get them trained as long as they fit kind of this soft skill attribute driven model. Let's go. And so we are still seeing clients with high interest and high demand in terms of hiring. At the same time, those that are less willing to be flexible and open about the talent and the talent that's available, I think they find themselves in a challenging situation where now it becomes about priorities. How quickly do you need to hire versus how long are you willing to wait for somebody that checks every single box?
And I would say, to add what I mentioned earlier, one of the things that good organizations do in terms of having these more sustainable strategies is not just looking at, the needs of today, but looking at the needs of the future. So, not only, where are we going in terms of our business segments, where are our competitors going? How does that impact skills? How do, automation and some of those trends impact that and the skills that we're going to require for the future? So, when we talk about career development, yeah, people might not be in much of a need to move today, but as a sustainable talent organization, we want to be able to think of, what are our talent needs in the future and begin incorporating that into some of our development opportunities and maybe getting some insight from recruitment as well in terms of where do they see the candidates going in terms of those skills. Maybe they don't see much of a development in terms of the recruitment field, in terms of the candidates that are out there. So maybe we need to have more of a focus on the upskilling and reskilling of the talent that we have to fill those needs that we're going to have for the future.
This, I think, speaks to the need for talent pros to really position themselves as consultative leaders to the entire business. Because in that case, Adam, of trying to plan for the future and what skills are we going to need and what technologies will we need to to be building and shipping in a longer timeline? You can't answer that question unless you're in those meetings with the people making those decisions, and the people making those decisions are running the business. And if they don't have those answers, well, then what are they running, you know? So without that sort of access, you really can't plan for the future, right? Like, how can you plan for the skills you're trying to hire if your company doesn't even know where it's going to be in 5 years? So Adam, I would be curious how you would suggest people do that. How do you kind of the word ingratiate's dirty. I don't know that that's the word I want to use, but like, how do you make sure that you are having a seat at the table and that you are actually in those conversations so that you can be an individual who plans for the future?
Well, I think just as we do with any business leader within the organizations, being able to demonstrate the value that our place in the business has for the greater ecosystem of the organization. In terms of if we don't have that talent to meet those needs of those business case, what's it going to impact our business? How's it going to have a negative impact or a positive impact if we're able to achieve the talent needs that we have for the goals that they have? So I think it's building that business case as a talent professional and being able to say, like, hey, in order to make sure we have the talent to meet these needs of these business plans that you have, I need to be aware of them. I need to be part of these conversations. But I also look at it, I talked before where I see career development really as kind of that personal experience of the individual for the broader base goals of the organization. We talk a lot when we work with organizations is helping the individuals think about the trends on, in their business, in their organization, in their profession, and how that has an impact on their careers. So they can look at that. And a lot of times we find, the kind of the ground up work that individuals are saying, like, hey, I see these trends and I see how that might impact my career. And they're pushing that forward. So if talent professionals, through a talent, sustainable talent strategy are looking at, the individuals and how they, how these trends and changes impact their careers, and then taking the broader strategy from the top down, really provides the career development professional, if you will, with some great insights that they'll be able to provide to the organization in terms of talent they need, talent they have, and where do they need to either to recruit or develop.
Now that the slides are down and it's just us guys, I wanted to dig in deeper to some of this stuff, and would just like to remind the folks out there in webinar land that we're going to save some time at the end here in a few minutes for some Q&A. So if there's any follow-up questions that you think I'm doing a bad job for not asking, please write those in the Q&A, and we'll make sure to spend some time at the end so you can get those answered. So I wanted to dig a little deeper into the why now moment for this webinar and just into the current economic reality. And Jonathan, I think you kind of explained what's responsible for this seeming paradox in low unemployment, but also low mobility. But I'm curious if you have thoughts on whether this is just a standard sort of cycle that we see in terms of regular shifts in supply and demand with talent, or if this is truly like a unique new normal and that we've never seen something like this before. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, personally, I don't think that any of these cycles or ebbs and flows last forever. They're a moment in time. Now, can that cause chaos for organizations and how they handle and solve these problems in the moment? Yes, but I don't see this as a long-term kind of this is what we're dealing with forever. Adam's in the same boat. We've been in this business for quite some time. There are always unique moments in time and challenges that represent themselves. But I think overall, this will change in time.
And just to build on what Jonathan said, so I'd say, in the grand scheme of things, this is normal in terms of it ebbing and flowing. I'd say that there's probably a more significance to this particular ebb, just because, I work, because of the nature of our business, even though I do career development and mobility, I also work closely hand in hand with our career transitions, especially for helping redeploy that internal talent in conjunction with the reduction in force. And, over the last 2 years, we've had significant volumes of people that are been downsizing. And I think we showed on that slide in terms of we had a big reduction in force in terms of tech. And I think that was something that hadn't been experienced before. So I think that's had some impact on, the size of this ebb or flow, however you want to call it, than we've had before. So I think the cycle is normal. I think, probably the veracity of it's probably a little bit more significant than spin.
It's the circumstances are unique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The circumstances, like, they're always unique though, right?
Exactly.
But then does it kind of bubble up into the same sort of market pressure around how many jobs are there, how much talent is there? Like, is that still the ultimate kind of plus minus that we have to consider?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of this can really be tied in terms of solving the uniqueness of the current problem in terms of education, at least from a recruiting standpoint. We go back to expectations and the divergence of those and kind of the gap between potential candidates and clients. And it's really about educating and speaking to them about what is currently happening, what is currently available, how would you attract or how would you retain or how are you going to develop these individuals, and really managing expectations on both sides to try to find this happy medium where, said company might not get the everything that they want, and said candidate might not get, I'm going to get a 50% compensation increase and I'm going to work from home in my shorts and sandals and, call me if you need me type thing. So it's from a recruiting standpoint, helping to bridge that gap to ultimately achieve the goals of both sides.
Do you find yourself in that moment, Jonathan, of just like shifting expectations where you're going out and speaking to people, or perhaps your team is, and maybe they are expecting that they're going to be able to work from home and be in shorts and sandals like I am now forever? Do you have to kind of give them a little bit of a reality check to be like, hey, listen, the glory days of work from home are coming to an end? I don't know if that's the take you're saying, but just no, I'm more asking about shifting expectations on the talent side.
I'm tracking with your question. What I would say is I think really when it comes down to it, it's to Adam's point earlier about personalization. This is such a personal thing. So it's nuanced for every individual. And I think there is a part of it where, yes, there's some education. I would never force somebody and say, hey, you need to just get over it. That's not realistic. It's about their interests. There's opportunities are still out there. What's the prioritization for you? And walking them through and understanding what is the level of priority for them. And does that align with the opportunities, right? If you're dead set on, working from home and the shorts and sandals as you are, Rob, that's okay. There are opportunities out there. But how long are you willing to wait for that opportunity? What is your level of flexibility? What does that mean to you? What sort of impact will that have on you? It's a really nuanced and personalized conversation for every individual. And the same goes on the client side. Every client has their own goals and objectives and their viewpoint on what they think is the right way to move forward for their organization. The good news is there are many opportunities for candidates and clients to connect in a way that they see makes the most sense for them. So there is an alignment there. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
It's just really, it's great for folks to be considering this as a talent professional, and then also as a candidate, if they're not right now, as they will be at some other time, just to kind of hear from things on the other side of the interview table. Like, what is the hiring organization going through? Like, you only hear this very small piece of the recruiting approach, but there's all these other macroeconomic things going into this conversation. Adam, I'm curious how you see career development having changed. Like, people are maybe sticking around more, less likely to leave, but does that mean they're more likely to want to raise their hand and try and add some skills to their tool belt?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it's become more accepted, so I think organizations are saying, like, we're willing to invest in the individuals and allow them the opportunity to do so, where before it might have been, we're going to pick and choose who those individuals are. Now it's a little bit more democratic, where individuals are being able to come to the organization, say, I want to do this, or I want to develop, or this is a pathway that I want to pursue. So that's more accepted than it was before, where before it was maybe a little bit more paternalistic, where, hey, we've picked you and you can develop these skills, versus someone saying like, hey, I'm interested in this, I want to develop those skills. So that's where I've seen the biggest shift in terms of, organizations and over the years that we've been able to work with them. But I'd say organizations are a little bit more well-defined in terms of approaching career development, where before it was a little bit more haphazard. Now organizations are taking a more systemic approach to implementing a career development program. And again, if we use a sustainable talent strategy, they're also getting the input from the recruiting team and being able to find out, what those needs are and where the skills might be, and where they need to develop versus hire and recruit. But I see a lot of organizations, they might be able to say, well, hey, we've been recruiting outside too much. We need to develop our team a little bit more. So I think again, we said before, it's a yin and yang between recruiting, developing people. But again, that if we have a well-defined sustainable talent strategy, we'd be able to navigate those.
I love key takeaways as a lifelong content marketer, career long, not lifelong, career content marketer. My first words were top of funnel. No, I love a key takeaway. And so I wanted to make sure the folks in webinar land get something that they can immediately put into practice. So I would love to hear from both of you. Maybe Jonathan, we'll start with you. What are just some questions people can ask about their own organization to individuals in their own organization to kind of assess whether they have a sustainable talent strategy and where they can start to make impact?
Yeah, I think it starts with, do we have a total talent strategy? And is it if we don't, okay, that's path one. If we do, is it providing the desired outcome? That's a big one, and oftentimes you see that's where things can get off track. I would additionally add that if it does align with the outcome, is it aligned with the business goals? Hopefully those two things are aligned. When those things get out of whack, you start to see breakdowns in the process, and those outcomes oftentimes can be camouflage where we're solving for a symptom and not necessarily the root cause. But I think if we start at a high level of what do we have a total talent strategy? Is it achieving the desired outcome? I think those are great points to start as a takeaway. And frankly, as a shameless plug, Adam and I do this every day. If you find yourself in kind of an uh-oh moment, like I don't know if we have one or I don't know if it's working, reach out to us. We would be more than happy to talk through this. Again, this is what we do day in and day out. But that would be my big key takeaway in terms of questions to ask yourself.
Yeah, and I agree with Jonathan. We're experts in this field in terms of doing this day in and day out with organizations. So a lot of times we just have conversations with organizations about what we've done with other organizations. What are some of the common trends? So I think that's a great thing. Even this might be a little bit of a shameless plug. And the other is what we're talking about. We Jonathan and I have been talking about almost the whole time is having that alignment between recruitment and development. Oftentimes they're separate. So I would say is, do we have that connection to make that sustainable talent strategy? Are we working hand in hand with the talent, the team that's bringing in the talent and the team that's developing the talent within the organization? I think that's a relatively simple takeaway, which will help build, a more sustainable strategy if you don't already have a plan behind it.
I love that you just shared, Jonathan, that people should reach out to you and network with you.
This is what we do.
Yeah. So Jonathan's cell phone number is 212. No, I'm kidding. But probably they can slide into the LinkedIn DMs or something. I encourage everyone out there to be networking. And my experience speaking with talent pros is that they're very, very gracious with their time and information and love to kind of talk shop with folks. So that doesn't feel like that feels like a genuine offer, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Well, we have a ton of amazing questions that have come in from all of the attendees. So I'd love to lob some of these up to you both and have you crush them out of the park here with the remaining time that we have. So this one is like, I love this one. It's like we're writing an advice column here. I am an employee and I'm having a hard time approaching my manager about moving to a different department. I love my role and my team, but I want a new challenge. What is your best advice to approach the situation? Adam, do you want to take that one as the
I'd say, part of it is, I probably want to know a little bit more about why they have a challenge talking to the manager. Maybe it's just, they're just ambivalent, they're just not confident in doing it, or they fear that their manager might be blocking them. I know sometimes that happens with organizations. It goes back to what I talked about earlier, is helping managers be better prepared in that conversation. So hopefully it's not that, but I think as we've been talking all along, is, the organization wants to be able to retain individuals, so building that case of, I love it here at this organization, but there are some opportunities I might want to, I love working for this team, I love working for this organization, but I might want a different experience, but I want to stay here. And I think the good managers will be able to see the value of, hey, yeah, I want to be able to keep this team member here, because there's a lot of value them, even though they're a value to my team and I don't want to lose them. It's good to let them go. I use this analogy as, why was Alabama football always able to recruit the best talent? Because they were able to see that, hey, I recruited this talent and they were more likely to go to the NFL than any other, college program. And I think managers, if they're able to be seen as that, Alabama football, it's like, I can develop people. So yeah, I might lose a valuable team member, but they're going to go on to have success in other parts of the organization. More people are going to want to work for me because I'm that talent development. So hopefully that manager is there, and then this person that asked that question would be able to go have that conversation by building that case of, hey, I want to stay here at this organization. I love the team, but I might want a different opportunity. Hopefully it's not the case of they're fearing going to the manager because they want to keep that talent. They're not going to let them go, and they're going to hold on to them with an iron fist. So hopefully that helps a little bit and, provides a little value. But I think being able to share that, there's a lot of value of keeping me within the organization, even though I might want to leave that particular team.
Very well said. If I could add something to that, I would. Oftentimes this is very simple, but it becomes overlooked as this is a very personal situation. But if you haven't spoken to your manager and you're preparing to do so, expressing the value that you can add to the organization by making this move is oftentimes overlooked. And it can be, I want to move, and can we make that happen? If you can clearly articulate the value that you can contribute to the organization by moving into this department, it might help your chances.
Yeah, that is great advice. Another question I wanted to read to all of you says, there are a couple around this theme of getting buy-in from the organization writ large. This one writes, do you have any tips for how to build and sustain employee engagement in selling talent development and career development? And they're basically asking that, like, okay, we're all friends here. We all understand the importance of a sustainable talent business strategy, but I got to convince my CFO. I got to convince the VP of whatever. How do I make sure that the rest of the organization is as bought into this as I am?
Yeah. So I would start, obviously, there's a lot of great statistics out there in terms of global statistics, in terms of, PwC, McKinsey, even LHH. So we have a great global workforce trends report out there. It was out maybe in June, that's able to share some great statistics around the importance of developing talent, being able to showcase them a future within the organization. Most people are clamoring for some sort of support, and being able to provide that provides a differentiation for the organization and allows us to help them find a better fit for themselves and obviously retain them in the long term. Now, I know a lot of organizations, as they do employee engagement surveys, and that was one of the things they mentioned, a lot of times they're able to tie the engagement statistics back to a certain value. So if we're able to increase engagement a certain percentage, this is the value it means to our organization. And I think for most organizations, unfortunately, career development or showing people there's a future within the organization are like in their bottom 5. So that's really low hanging fruit, saying, like, if we can increase this by 5%, what would that mean to the organization? That's very dramatic. Or if you're looking at retention, a lot of times you can provide statistics around, if we're able to retain this talent, what does it mean in terms of not being able to have to recruit people? Sorry, Jonathan.
No offense taken.
What are the costs to the organization by having to constantly recruit new people into the organization because we're losing talent? And I said, so I think either, through those lenses of engagement or retention, you're able to build a case of, why do we need to keep this people? Why would it impact our engagement by showing people that there is a future for themselves within the organization?
Well said, Adam. And I think that in my mind, this if simplified down to its base level, this is an investment case. And with any investment case, you want to lead with data. You want to show how this will help achieve the organization's goals. right? And then do you have an ROI? Is there a return on investment that they can expect from this, and can you measure it? Those are the things that I think of as a standard business case components to take to leadership to help solicit buy-in. And again, without sounding salesy here, there's also an opportunity for objective third-party feedback and input, which whether it's Adam or us, it doesn't matter. But that oftentimes helps remove the personalization of it and take it from a subjective conversation to an objective conversation.
Yeah, those are both great advices. It's similar to what you said before, Jonathan, about just like what value can you add to the team, right? Like what
Exactly.
value will this add to the company? If you can put a number on something in a conversation with a CFO, for example, you will probably get what you want.
Yeah, there's some insight that we've shared over the years about the cost of a bad hire. To Adam's point about retention, like what does it mean when you make the wrong hire financially? What does it do to the organization? And those type of data points always catch the attention of a CFO specifically when it comes to making a business case or looking for buy-in.
Great, thanks you both. Here's another one. An employee that wants to continue growing with an organization but has not been successful with their development opportunities. They see themselves moving up. Stakeholders see that individual growing laterally to continue bridging skills gaps, not a performance issue, more of an lack of alignment. So Adam, in this situation, how would you proceed?
I think it all comes down to, having conversations, having frank, honest conversations, but doing it within whatever that organizational structure is in terms of the development opportunities. I find oftentimes when we're finding that disconnect between what the organization might want somebody to do and what they might want to do is, really having that candid discussion around, here's the opportunities, here's where you see you having success, here's where, you've proven to have success in the past, here's where we think the opportunities might be a best fit for you. Oftentimes, they're not really getting into this candid discussion. It's more of this person wants to do this, we want them to do that, and that's the end of it. So I think if we have some more detailed and candid discussions around why we think they want to make that move, what might be the benefits of that, because I think a lot of people, again, changing the perception of what does career development actually mean. Jonathan mentioned this earlier, maybe moving up isn't their desire. Maybe they want to stay in that role. Maybe they haven't realized that moving laterally into other parts of the organization might be more beneficial to them. They're automatically just thinking, well, the only way to develop my career is to move up. So maybe there's other parts of the business that if they developed some skills and were able to move laterally, maybe that part of the business would grow more and they'd have more opportunities there. So I think, again, having those frank discussions and not just saying, well, they want to do this, they want to do that. It's more of, well, why do you want to do that? Here's why we think you would want to do this. And oftentimes that candor and more thorough discussion would be able to open that up for them.
Yeah, that's a great advice. I think it's similar to just this conversation that we keep coming back to about like, what are the motivations? Like, what is it that you want? And if there's misalignment there and like they want to move up, but the team is like, no, we really need you in the place you are right now, then maybe the conversation is like, hey, if you can just suck it up for this short period of time, or we can try and backfill you, but like we need you in this place for right now. And here's the business reason why.
Yeah. And I don't mean to keep pounding the same nail, but it's those conversations. A lot of times, when we have these discussions, it's assumptions. I'm assuming that that's what they want. I've never really had the conversation. I'm just assuming, so again, having more often frank, candid discussions tends to be helpful in those situations.
I'd like to add and to go full circle back to the interview question that you asked us. When talking to somebody about their motivations, oftentimes growth comes up. And I ask, what does growth mean to you? Because growth means something different to everyone. And to just one of the best tips I heard over the years was that growth is not linear. And I think that's where a lot of the starting point is this linear growth up a corporate ladder, so to speak. It could mean growth or an increase in scale. It could be an increased growth in responsibility. Some folks have an interest in growth in compensation. All of those things lead to a different path. But asking yourself, what does growth mean to you? Will help you better understand how to frame that to your boss or to the stakeholders that were mentioned, because it is impactful, and you need to know what growth means to you first. I'll add that, by taking a lateral move, it might feel like it's not an elevated type promotion, so to speak. But what if that lateral move increased your exposure and your responsibility and allowed you to take 2 steps up the rung or up the ladder in 2 years? Would it be worth it then? Those are the questions that I typically encourage folks to ask themselves.
That is great. Thank you both for your candor and for sharing your wit and wisdom with us here today. We are creeping up on our full time here at webinar and the scheduled webinar time. So we have to wind down. There are some awesome other questions in there that I regret we did not get to, but like Jonathan said, feel free to reach out, slide into those DMs, and they'll be able to help you out. If you want to learn more about this topic, there is a ton of research that is compiled in this paper, How to Build a Sustainable Talent Strategy. You know what to do with the QR code. So there is additional info for you there. And I think that just about does it for all of us here at LHH. So one more time before we go off into the sunset to our other meetings, I'll just say thank you all for being with us here today. Thank you, Jonathan and Adam, for being yourselves and for sharing all of your info. I've been Rob Stevenson. You've all been amazing, wonderful webinar attendees. Have a spectacular week out there and happy hunting.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.